in my own case, people had been doing some public education about juries' rights well beforehand. We had had a reading group on the jury nullification book by Clay Conrad, and some folks from that reading group then started passing out pamphlets from the Fully Informed Jurors Association out front of the federal courthouse every time that there was a trial, just from anybody who happened to be walking by at the time when jurors were supposed to report for jury duty. And they'd been doing this for like 6 weeks or so before my trial. And so they were out there the first day my jurors were supposed to report. And then partway through the jury selection process, the judge and the prosecutor found out that that one of the jurors had gotten one of these pamphlets from the Fully Informed Jurors Association. And the judge said, well, how many of you received this pamphlet before you walked in on the first day? And like 80% of the hands went up. And the prosecutor lost his mind. And we had to have a special meeting in the judge's chambers with the prosecution and my legal team and the judge. And it was the only time I saw the prosecution like really lose composure. And he wanted to declare a mistrial and get a whole new jury pool. And he was like shaking when he was reading this pamphlet. And he was saying, this notion of voting your conscience, it's out in space. And rather than declare a mistrial, the judge called each potential juror one at a time into his chambers. And I was, my legal team was in there, the prosecution was in there, the juror was at the end of the long table with the judge at the other end, and the judge would say, now, you need to disregard everything that was on that pamphlet. You need to understand that it's not your job to decide what's right or wrong. Your job is to listen to what I say the law says, and you have to enforce it, even if you think it's morally wrong. Can you do that? Can you do what I ask you to do, even if you think it's morally wrong? And unless they said yes, they weren't on the jury. And I was sitting in the seat closest to the juror. And I watched one person after another say, yes, Your Honor, I'll do whatever you ask me to do, even if I think it's morally wrong. And I could tell that they meant it. I could tell that they meant it. And that moment was the greatest moment of clarity that I had throughout my entire process. I think it was also the moment that I decided to go to divinity school. Because I understood the power of conscience so clearly at that moment. I think I understood for the first time how some of the great atrocities in history could happen. How something like a Holocaust or a genocide could happen when people can so easily say, oh, it's not my job to decide what's right or wrong. I'll just follow orders even if I think they're morally wrong. I saw all these jurors who had never been in jury duty before, and they come into this big, huge federal courthouse that's all imposing, and they had 2 metal detectors to go through because they set up an extra one outside of the door in my courtroom. So they had 2 security screenings to go through, and then they come into this ornate courtroom with like the judge sitting way up above them, speaking down to them, and they were able to just buy into that and say, okay, it's not my job to decide what's right or wrong. And I saw how such atrocities could happen when people just let go of their own moral authority and let go of their own conscience. But at the same time, I saw that prosecutor flipping out. I saw a U.S. attorney who had the full power of the United States government behind him, absolutely terrified at the notion of citizens using their conscience. He was terrified that citizens thought they could use their conscience in exercising their civic duties. And so I saw this huge dichotomy hinging on the power of conscience, where when people let go of their conscience and let go of their own moral authority and the shared moral authority of their community, that any atrocity would be possible. But when people held on to their moral authority, had faith in their conscience, and then the shared moral authority of their communities, that there is no power structure that can't be impacted by that.